What if I told you that some of the biggest Hollywood stars, people who could live anywhere they want, buy castles in Europe, own islands in the Caribbean, or luxury apartments in New York, are actually choosing to live in the Philippines? Not just for a quick trip or business, but because they truly want to live here. Surprising, right? You'd expect them to pick Malibu, Lake Como, or the south of France, with all the other rich and famous. But instead, you'll find them in Palawan or in the cool hills of Tagaytay. They're sipping Kaping Barako in the morning, waving to their neighbors like regular folks, or walking barefoot down quiet provincial roads without bodyguards. These are world-famous celebrities, Oscar winners, faces you normally see on giant movie screens or glossy magazine covers. Yet here they are in small Filipino towns, learning Tagalog from their helpers, falling in love with the smell of tinola cooking in a clay pot, or getting emotional during Sunday Mass sung by a children's choir. And one story stands out. A few months ago, something happened that almost no one noticed online. It didn't make headlines, but it should have. A famous American actor, known for big action movies, was spotted crying inside a church in Bohol. Not at a wedding, not at a funeral, just during a regular Sunday Mass with ordinary Filipinos. No cameras, no entourage, no attention. Later, when asked why, he said, "I've been to hundreds of churches all over the world. None of them gave me the peace I felt here." So why is this happening? Why are stars who live in mansions, eat at five-star restaurants, and walk red carpets suddenly finding home in the Philippines? To explain, let me tell you about Daniel. He wasn't a superstar, but everyone in Hollywood knew him. He was a producer who worked on huge action films in the 2000s. He made his millions, bought the cars, the houses, and lived the dream, at least on the outside. But inside, he was burned out. His life was a blur of premieres, contracts, parties, and private jets. Everywhere he went looked the same, expensive, polished, but empty. Then one day, while filming in Bangkok, a young Filipino crew member showed him photos of Siargao, just sunsets, palm trees, and small sari-sari stores. He told Daniel, "Go there. You'll feel something, not like Bali, not like anywhere else." Daniel laughed it off. But months later, feeling lost, he booked a flight. When he arrived in the Philippines, something shifted. Yes, the beauty was incredible, but it was more than that. It was the tricycle driver in Cebu who refused to overcharge him. It was the family in Davao who invited him to spend Christmas with them, even though they'd just met in a cafe. It was kids playing barefoot in the streets, waving at him, not because he was famous, but simply because he was there. He stayed for a week, then a month, then half a year. Eventually, he bought a small two-bedroom home in Siargao. Nothing fancy, just close enough to the sea to hear the waves at night. No assistants, no schedules, just Daniel, the island, and the start of his healing. And he wasn't alone. Word spread quietly among his Hollywood friends, directors, designers, actors. Some came for a short visit, others stayed for good. They would ask him, "How can you live like this? Isn't it dangerous? Isn't it hard?" And Daniel would smile and say, "It's not about safety, it's about soul." Because what he found here, and what others began to discover, was something no Beverly Hills party or Hollywood mansion could ever give them: humanity. One evening, at a simple backyard dinner under string lights with nothing more than grilled fish and calamansi juice, a Hollywood actress leaned back in her chair, barefoot, and whispered, "I haven't felt this human in years." That's when something remarkable started to happen. These celebrities didn't just return home with beach photos. They carried the Philippines in their hearts, a hunger for real connection, for values rooted not in fame, but in family, in faith, in bayanihan. And they told their friends, who told their friends, until a quiet migration began. Not the kind that makes headlines or tabloids, but a migration of weary souls finally searching for rest. For Daniel, this wasn't just a break, it became a transformation. What started as a getaway turned into a new life. He wasn't just visiting anymore, he was family. The moment the old man selling Tahoe on the corner called him Anak, son, Daniel knew he belonged. And soon, so did Jenna. Jenna had once been one of the most photographed women in the world, a blockbuster star in her 20s, a tabloid favorite in her 30s. And then she disappeared. No farewell tour, no press release, she simply walked away. What few people knew was that Jenna had been quietly watching Daniel's journey. His emails, his photos of a barefoot, unguarded life stirred something deep inside her. She wanted that too. So she booked a flight under another name. Instead of rushing to the beaches, she went north, to the rice terraces of Banaue, which she had once seen in a documentary and never forgotten. 8 hours by bus, a flat tire, a backpack full of doubts. And finally, she stood at the edge of those ancient green stairways carved into the mountains. Mist touched her face, silence wrapped around her, and she cried. Not just because it was breathtaking, but because for the first time in decades, no one recognized her. No one asked for a photo, no one even stared. She was simply another tired traveler in muddy sneakers. And that anonymity didn't feel like loss, it felt like freedom. The quiet she found wasn't empty or lonely. It was the kind of silence that feels like a deep breath, like a soft blanket at dawn. The townspeople noticed her, of course. How could they not? A tall foreigner wandering barefoot through the market. They were curious but never intrusive. They smiled, they nodded, they pointed her in the right direction when she looked lost. But no one asked who she was. They didn't care about the headlines she once carried. They cared only about who she was becoming. She found a small house by the sea, shaded by acacia trees. Close enough to the market that she could walk barefoot in the mornings. Life slowed down there. She learned to cook sinigang from her landlady. She joined Bible studies in Visayan, not understanding every word, but feeling every prayer. She started writing again. Not scripts for studios, not speeches for cameras, just letters. Letters to herself, to the girl she once was, and to the woman she was still becoming. Jenna's story, like Daniel's, wasn't just about finding a place. It was about finding a mirror. And the Philippines became that mirror. Not because it flattered them, but because it humbled them. It stripped away the noise, the masks, the excess, and returned them to something raw and human. Something no Hollywood award could ever give. Word spread quietly, not in magazines or red carpets, but in whispers. Another actor came, this time a man famous for playing superheroes. Someone who lived in the skies on screen, but whose feet rarely touched the ground in real life. He arrived quietly. No entourage, no cameras. He rented a modest hut by the water. To the locals, he was just Kuya Jim, the tall guy who helped carry chairs during barangay cleanups, the man who bought pandesal for kids in the morning. He stayed 3 months, left, came back 6 months later with his wife. Today, they own land in Camiguin. People often assume these celebrities are running away from politics, from taxes, from scandals. But that's not true. They're not fleeing. They're returning to something they didn't even realize they had lost, a sense of groundedness, a way of living that doesn't rush, a culture where laughter comes easy, where generosity is natural, and where your worth isn't measured by your last project, but by how you treat people on the street. Daniel once put it best: Hollywood trains you to chase. Always the next role, the next deal, the next image. But the Philippines taught me to stay, to sit still and love what I already have. His life changed in ways he couldn't explain. He built another house, not by the beach this time, but in a quiet barangay where carabaos still passed by in the morning. He called it his forever home, and you wouldn't believe who helped him build it. Yes, the locals, but also Hollywood friends. A director who once won an Emmy, a costume designer from Vancouver, a stuntman from New York. All of them with hammers in hand, laying wood, pouring cement, singing karaoke after long days. They didn't celebrate milestones with champagne. They celebrated with lechon and beer, with karaoke under the stars. It was messy. It was imperfect. But it was real. That's the thing. The Philippines is becoming more than a destination. For people who lived too long in the noise, it's becoming a village, a place where their souls can finally exhale. And it didn't stop with Daniel or Jenna or Jim. Take Peter, for example, a once celebrated screenwriter. Peter had written sharp comedies and emotional monologues. His words had made studios millions. His name had been in lights. But fame, as Peter would later say, has a sharp edge. It cuts right through you, he admitted. It slices away at who you really are until you can't even recognize yourself. Peter came to the Philippines by accident. He was on vacation in Thailand when a typhoon forced his plane to divert. Cebu was the nearest safe airport. He arrived tired, frustrated, ready to leave as soon as the skies cleared. But Cebu held him, not with luxury hotels or tourist traps, but with something far smaller. A bowl of arroz caldo in a tiny eatery, served by a woman named Marissa. She called him Sir Pete before he ever told her his name. When he tried to pay extra, she refused. When he asked for directions, she walked him 2 blocks herself just to make sure he didn't get lost. In his world, where every smile was rehearsed and every gesture calculated, that simple kindness hit him like a wave. He never boarded his next flight. Instead, Peter rented a small apartment above a sari-sari store in Liloan. The walls were thin, the electricity cut out sometimes, but it became the first place he wrote something just for himself, not for money, not for approval, just for him. And for the first time in 20 years, his words felt honest. That's the secret. What Hollywood forgets, the Philippines remembers. That stories don't need to be loud to be powerful. That life doesn't need to be big to be meaningful. That joy doesn't need to be bought. It can be cooked, shared, sung. Even those used to living fast, filming faster, always on the move, slow down here. They begin to notice the smell of rice at dusk, the roosters at dawn, the kids shouting "Tay" as their father comes home on a motorcycle, the way strangers pray for you before you travel, even if you've only just met. And it shocks them, because in Los Angeles people ask, "What do you do?" But in the Philippines, they ask, "Kumain ka ba? Have you eaten?" It's not small talk. It's love disguised as a question. And that changed everything. For Daniel, for Jenna, for Jim, for Peter. The Philippines didn't just welcome them. It adopted them. They were no longer stars, no longer foreigners. They were neighbors. They were family. And with that came a new kind of responsibility. Daniel started scholarships for kids in his barangay. Jenna quietly funded a community center for single mothers in Negros. Peter began free writing workshops for out-of-school youth in Cebu. They didn't post about it. They didn't announce it. They simply gave back because they already felt they had received too much. This wasn't charity for headlines. It was a sacred debt, paid not with money, but with heart. Maybe that's what makes the Philippines different. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It doesn't ask you to be famous. It only asks you to be present, to show up, to care, to share. And in that quiet exchange, that rhythm of giving and receiving, these Hollywood stars found something they had never discovered in all their years under the spotlight. They found meaning. Daniel once told a small island radio station, "In LA, everyone wants to know who you know, but here people want to know who you are when the lights go out." Maybe that's what they were chasing all along, not fame, not fortune, but wholeness. And in the strangest twist of fate, those who had lived under the harshest lights found it in a country of sun, storm, and song. Among a people who smile even when they have little, who dance even after typhoons, who pray not just for themselves, but for strangers they've never even met. So yes, it may sound strange that Hollywood is quietly moving to the Philippines, that Oscar winners are buying homes in remote towns, speaking broken Tagalog, singing karaoke in slippers. But maybe it makes perfect sense. Because in a world that never stopped spinning, they found the one place that told them it was okay to be still. And in that stillness, they found home. And you might ask, if this is true, why don't we see it in the headlines? Why don't we read about these actors in wet markets in Novaliches or playing basketball with kids on dusty barangay courts? Because that's the point. This story was never meant for the headlines. It was meant for the heart. They're not performing anymore. They're not chasing applause. They're not clinging to the spotlight. They're simply living. And in the Philippines, life isn't something you put on display. It isn't something you wear like a costume or post as a perfect picture. Here, life is shared, quietly, humbly, moment by moment, meal by meal, laugh by laugh. There was one story, never reported in newspapers, never shown on TV, only whispered in a lakeside community in Laguna. It was about an elderly American man who bought a modest bungalow by the water. Nothing fancy, no staff, no guards. He simply moved in. To most, he looked like any other foreign retiree, but some older locals, those who grew up watching cowboy shows, thought his face looked strangely familiar. He introduced himself simply as Paul. No mention of Hollywood, no mention of fame, no mention of who he once was. Paul was different from the usual foreigners passing through. He didn't stay in resorts. He didn't ask for VIP treatment. Instead, he joined the people. He prayed in the small chapel. He volunteered for community cleanups. He brought snacks to the barangay tanods during their late-night patrols. For months, nobody really knew who he was. Until one day, a tricycle driver's son found an old VHS tape, slid it into a dusty player, and there he was, young Paul, riding across the desert as a TV cowboy in the 1970s. Once a household name, once adored by millions, Paul was now grey-haired, walking quietly to buy fish at the market, smiling at neighbours who had no idea they were talking to an old Hollywood star. When someone finally asked him why he chose the Philippines of all places, Paul's answer stayed with everyone who heard it. In America, I spent my whole life pretending to be someone else. Here, I get to be me, and that's more than I ever hoped for. And maybe that's what all of them were chasing. Daniel, Jenna, Peter, Paul. Not escape, not luxury, but a return to themselves. That's the quiet genius of the Philippines. This country doesn't try to impress you. It doesn't ask you to prove yourself. It doesn't bend to trends or chase appearances. It simply exists, raw, real, sometimes chaotic, often breathtaking, and always full of heart. It teaches you, if you're willing to slow down, that there is more to life than applause. That sometimes the truest applause is a neighbor offering hot lugar on a rainy morning, a child calling you Tito after only a week, a stranger on a bus giving up their seat without hesitation. These moments will never trend online. But for those who spent too long under the crushing weight of fame, they mean everything. And now these actors, these global celebrities, aren't just buying houses in the Philippines. They are planting roots, building lives, raising families, adopting communities as their own. One actress chose to give birth not in Beverly Hills, not in a Swiss clinic, but in a hospital in Iloilo. Why? Not for luxury, but because, as she said, the nurses here made me feel like I mattered. Another world-famous director is funding a film school in Baguio because he believes young Filipino storytellers deserve a stage of their own. They're not just investing in property, they're investing in the Filipino soul. Of course, not everyone will understand. Some will ask, why the Philippines? Others will dismiss it as a trend, a whim, a midlife crisis. But those who have lived here, those who have been embraced by the spirit of kisama, of belonging, know better. Because once you've laughed through a blackout, once you've sung through a storm, once you've prayed shoulder to shoulder with strangers at a novena, you never really leave. You might fly back to the States, you might shoot another film, you might attend another premiere, but your heart stays here, with the old man who calls you anak at the market, with the child who asks if you've eaten, with the woman who shares her umbrella without asking for it back. So why are Hollywood actors buying homes in the Philippines? The answer is simple, because here they found something Hollywood could never offer. Not another career move, not another vacation, but a rebirth. In this land of light and rain, of song and struggle, of community and quiet faith, they found a second chance at being human. And for anyone who has ever felt lost, who has ever carried the weight of the world's expectations, isn't that what we're all searching for? Not just a place to exist, but a place to finally, truly feel at home. If this story touched you, imagine how many more are waiting to be told. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your own journey in the comments, because maybe, just maybe, your story will inspire the next soul searching for home.